Imagine it's September 11th, 2001. The sun rises over Manhattan. People grab their coffee, head to the subway, and clock into their offices at the World Trade Center. But this time, nothing happens. The 4 hijacked planes never take off. The towers continue to scrape the sky, a permanent fixture of the New York skyline. We don't wake up to a new normal, we simply stay in the old one. It's often said that 9/11 was the day the 21st century truly began. It was the catalyst for 2 decades of war, a global surveillance state, and a fundamental shift in how we view the other. But what if that catalyst was removed? What would your life, your country, and your world look like today? Today, we're exploring the butterfly effect of a world where 9/11 never happened. To understand the alternate 2000s, we have to look at what the world was focused on before the towers fell. In 2001, the Cold War was over. The US was the world's sole superpower. There was no war on terror. President George W. Bush was actually struggling in the polls. His primary focus wasn't foreign policy. It was domestic issues like the No Child Left Behind Act and tax cuts. Without 9/11, Bush likely remains a domestic-focused president. He doesn't become the war president with 90% approval ratings. In fact, without the patriotic rally-around-the-flag effect, the Democrats might have retaken the White House in 2004. More importantly, the massive $8 trillion spent on the global war on terror stays in the Treasury. Think about that number, $8 trillion. Without the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, that capital could have been diverted into high-speed rail, healthcare, or green energy. We might be living in a technologically superior 2025 because our resources weren't buried in the sands of the Middle East. Perhaps the most visceral change would be how we move. If you're a Gen Z viewer, you've never known an airport without the TSA. But before 9/11, airport security was often handled by private contractors. You could walk your loved ones all the way to the gate. You didn't take off your shoes. You didn't have liquid limits. But the change goes deeper than just convenience. 9/11 gave birth to the Patriot Act. It normalized the idea that the government should monitor your metadata, your emails, and your phone calls in the name of safety. Without the fear of terrorism, the surveillance state as we know it might never have been legalized. Privacy would still be a default expectation rather than a nostalgic luxury. Edward Snowden might just be an anonymous IT consultant. The geopolitical map would be unrecognizable. Without the 2003 invasion of Iraq, Saddam Hussein likely stays in power until his death. While he was a brutal dictator, his presence acted as a massive counterweight to Iran. Without the power vacuum created by his removal, ISIS likely never forms. The Syrian civil war might never have happened in the same way, and the massive European migrant crisis of 2015, which shifted the politics of an entire continent toward populism, might have been avoided. However, it's not all sunshine. The Arab Spring might have happened later or more violently. The Middle East would still have tensions, but they wouldn't be defined by the American interventionist footprint that defined the last 20 years. Finally, we have to talk about us. September 11th introduced a permanent sense of anxiety into the Western psyche. It created a us versus them mentality that fueled a rise in Islamophobia and, eventually, the deep political polarization we see today. Without a common enemy to fight abroad, would Americans have turned on each other sooner, or would the lack of fear-based politics have kept us more united? Culturally, the 2000s would have looked different. Pop culture wouldn't have been dominated by gritty, dark reboots like The Dark Knight or military shooters like Call of Duty. The optimism of the 90s might have coasted well into the 2000s. We like to imagine that a world without 9/11 would be a utopia. And in many ways, the lives saved, the trillions of dollars retained, it would be. But history has a way of finding new tragedies. Perhaps another event would have defined the century. But for better or worse, we live in the shadow of those 2 fallen towers. We are a post-9/11 civilization, and sometimes it's worth looking back at the world we lost, just to understand the one we're trying to build today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into What If, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments. What do you think would be the biggest change in a world without 9/11?